Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today I'm going to be trying Chris Morocco's recipe for gluten-free chocolate-tahini brownies. So like many of you, I am more than a little bit skeptical of gluten-free baked goods because the texture is just never quite right. However, when I tried Claire Saffitz's recipe for a gluten-free chocolate coconut macaroon cake, it was absolutely delicious, and I never would have believed it was gluten-free had I not made it myself. So when it comes to the challenge of a gluten-free brownie, I'm sure Chris Morocco is more than up for the challenge. So I do these Bon Appetit recipe tests every Wednesday. If you like this one, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Without any further ado, let's see how this goes. As always, I'll leave a link to the recipe and ingredient quantities in the description box below. So Chris didn't specify whether to use Dutch processed cocoa or natural cocoa for this recipe. Since there are no leavening agents, either one will work fine. I chose to use natural since it's what I had on hand. Next, we're moving on to prepping the wet ingredients. So we're actually tackling the wet ingredients in two separate batches. So the first batch requires some heating, so I'm doing this first to give it a little bit of time to cool down. So I am combining the coconut oil, a portion of the tahini, and then chopping up 6 ounces of bittersweet chocolate. So most of the chocolate flavor in these brownies is coming from the chocolate bar that we're melting here, so you want to be sure that this chocolate is a good quality. I'm using the Ghirardelli baking bar. It was a 60% cocoa, so it was a nice bittersweet flavor. It's definitely something that I would eat on its own, so I knew I would like it in the brownies here. And the smaller you chop this, really the better, because we are just going to melt this down over super low heat. We're not using a double boiler, which is a little bit of a risky move because chocolate can scorch easily. However, with the coconut oil, you are getting a little bit of a buffer. So once that's melted, pull it off the heat and just set it aside until we're ready for it. The second part of the wet ingredients is getting the sugars and eggs all creamed together. So this is a little bit more of a standard recipe process here. So I've got my packed brown sugar, granulated sugar, and 2 whole eggs. And we're just going to whip this in a stand mixer until it gets really nice and fluffy, and it should about double in volume. So you'll notice that the color change is very perceptible, and you'll see that it's starting to fill up your bowl a bit more. Once you're at about double the volume, we can add in the kosher salt and vanilla extract and just beat that through. Next, I'm just streaming in the slightly cooled chocolate mixture here. You want to go slow in case it's still a little bit warm. You don't want to scramble the eggs. So I streamed this in over the course of probably 30 seconds to a minute. So you can see it's very soupy. It does not look anything like brownie batter at this point. Next, we're just adding in the dry ingredients, and this is where the magic happens and the batter really starts to look like brownie batter. So since this is gluten-free, obviously you don't need to worry about developing gluten through over-mixing. However, I think you do still want to be careful to not overwork it too much because we worked all that air into the egg mixture, and overbeating will knock the air out. Once the mixture has thickened up and is holding its shape a little bit, I gauged by the beater marks on the perimeter of the bowl that it was thick. You can go ahead and transfer this into a prepared baking dish. So I'm using an 8x8 Pyrex. The recipe did not specify whether to use metal or glass, so I'm using glass, which is what I have on hand. And the prep for this is easy. It's just 2 overlapping strips of parchment paper, so it's super basic. The final step in this recipe is preparing the tahini swirl for the top. So this is really simple. It's just a matter of combining the tahini with the agave nectar and mixing to combine. So the agave is doing 2 things for us. First, it's giving a little bit of sweetness to the very savory tahini. And second, it's thinning the tahini out, making it easier to swirl. So I'm swirling using a toothpick, but you could definitely use a bamboo skewer, chopstick, and maybe even a dinner knife. And once you're satisfied with your swirl pattern, we're just gonna pop this in the oven until a toothpick inserted in the center comes out with a few moist crumbs. So the recipe said 22 to 26 minutes. In my oven with a glass pan, it actually took 32 minutes. So the toothpick really is the guide here. I let the brownies cool in their pan for about an hour, so they are pretty much cool to the touch at this point. And this is the finished product. So you can see it's nice and kind of fudgy looking here. This is definitely not a cakey brownie. And the swirl on the top looks pretty cool. So I am excited to dig in. Let's see how this tastes. Oh my gosh. This is incredibly rich. If you like a fudgy brownie, this is like fudgy brownie to the next level. It is absolutely unbelievable. And there's a really nice nuttiness from that tahini swirl on the top. This is definitely a win. I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.